In 1991, there were fewer than 100 Somalis living in Minneapolis. Today, over 30,000 call it home. That makes Minneapolis the largest Somali community outside of East Africa. Walk through the Cedar Riverside neighborhood and you'll see what I mean. Every storefront has Somali writing. Every conversation is in Somali. The Carmel Mall, a massive indoor marketplace, looks like it was lifted straight from Mogadishu. But here's what makes this story remarkable. Minnesota is one of the coldest states in America. Somalia is one of the hottest countries on earth. Minnesota was historically the most Scandinavian state in the nation. Over 30% of Minnesotans claim Norwegian or Swedish ancestry. So, how did Minneapolis, of all places, become America's Somali capital? This is that story. To understand why Somalis came to Minneapolis, you first need to understand why they left Somalia. January 26, 1991. Somalia's military dictator Siad Barre fled the capital of Mogadishu. His government collapsed overnight. What followed was chaos. Armed clan militias fought for control. There was no police force, no functioning hospitals, no schools, no government at all. By the end of 1991, over 300,000 Somalis had fled to refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia. The United Nations called it one of the worst humanitarian crises of the decade. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush authorized Operation Restore Hope, a U.S. military intervention to deliver food aid and restore order. American soldiers landed in Mogadishu. The mission eventually failed, culminating in the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, the Black Hawk Down incident. But the intervention had already set something in motion. The U.S. State Department, working with the United Nations, began accepting Somali refugees for resettlement in America. And when they asked which states could handle the influx, Minnesota stepped forward. Minnesota had something most states didn't experience. In the 1970s and 1980s, Minnesota had resettled tens of thousands of Southeast Asian refugees, Hmong, Vietnamese, Cambodian. Organizations like Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, Catholic Charities, and World Relief had built an entire infrastructure for refugee resettlement. They had volunteer networks, they had housing programs, they had job placement services, they had federal funding. So when the first Somali refugees arrived in 1993, Minnesota was ready. But resettlement alone doesn't explain why 30,000 Somalis ended up in Minneapolis. That's where the second part of the story begins. In 1994, a group of Somali men living in a small apartment in Minneapolis saw a job posting. A meatpacking plant in Marshall, Minnesota, about 150 miles southwest of Minneapolis, was hiring. No English required. Immediate start. They took the job. And then they did something crucial. They told other Somalis. In Somali culture, information spreads fast through clan and family networks. Word of mouth is everything. Within months, more Somalis were arriving in Minnesota for jobs. Not just in meatpacking, also in hospitality, warehouses, and food processing. These weren't glamorous jobs. They were hard physical labor, but they paid. And crucially, you could send money home to family members still in refugee camps. Jobs brought Somalis to Minnesota, but community kept them there. Once a few hundred Somalis established themselves in Minneapolis, something powerful happened. Chain migration. Here's how it works. A Somali refugee gets resettled in Minneapolis. He finds a job. He gets an apartment. He becomes a legal permanent resident. Now, under U.S. immigration law, he can sponsor his immediate family, wife, children, parents, to join him. Those family members arrive. They also find jobs. They also become legal residents. And they sponsor their family members. Within a decade, one person becomes 50. But it wasn't just direct family sponsorship. Something called secondary migration was even more powerful. Somali refugees who had been initially resettled in other states, California, Texas, Ohio, Georgia, heard about Minneapolis and moved there. Why? Because by the late 1990s, Minneapolis had something no other American city had: a critical mass of Somali community. If you spoke Somali, you could find a job through someone who spoke Somali. If you needed childcare, there were Somali daycare centers. If you needed halal meat, there were Somali grocery stores. If you needed to send money home, there were Somali-owned money transfer businesses. By 2006, Minneapolis had over 600 Somali-owned businesses. The community had reached a tipping point. Today, Cedar Riverside is the heart of Somali Minneapolis. The neighborhood sits just south of downtown along the Mississippi River. In the 1970s, it was a Scandinavian working-class neighborhood. Bars, diners, Catholic churches. By 2010, it had transformed. The Carmel Mall opened in 2005. A 4-story open-air Somali marketplace, over 100 vendors. Restaurants, clothing stores, gold jewelry shops, money transfer offices. It's the largest Somali mall outside of East Africa. Down the street, halal markets replaced corner stores. Mosques opened where bars once stood. And the political landscape shifted too. In 2016, Ilhan Omar, a Somali refugee who arrived in Minneapolis as a teenager, was elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives. In 2018, she became the first Somali American elected to the U.S. Congress. Today, Somali Americans serve on Minneapolis City Council, school boards, and state legislature. If this story sounds familiar, it should. This is the exact pattern that played out with Irish immigrants in Boston in the 1840s, Italian immigrants in New York in the 1900s, Jewish immigrants in New York in the 1920s, Cuban refugees in Miami in the 1960s, Vietnamese refugees in California in the 1970s. And just like those communities, the Somali community is following the same integration path. According to the most recent census, 87% of foreign-born Somalis in Minnesota are now naturalized U.S. citizens, and 58% of Somalis in Minnesota were born in the United States. This is a second-generation community now, American kids with American accents who happen to have Somali parents. Just like the Italians, just like the Irish, just like every immigrant wave before them. So how did Minneapolis become America's Somali capital? 3 factors. First, Minnesota's refugee resettlement infrastructure was already in place from the 1970s and 80s. Second, jobs that didn't require English, meatpacking, hospitality, warehousing. Third, chain migration through family reunification and secondary migration from other states. This wasn't a government plan. This wasn't some coordinated effort. This was the organic process of immigration, the same process that has shaped American cities for 200 years. The only difference is, this time, we're watching it happen in real time.